You know how to hold it all together, but when it comes to your relationships, something's always missing. Welcome to Emotionally Wealthy, a podcast for high achievers who are ready to trade emotional disconnection for clarity, fulfillment, and relationships that are nourishing, not draining. I'm your host, Karen Conlon, licensed therapist, transformational coach, and your guide in turning insight into action. Are you ready for it? Let's do this. Welcome once again to Emotionally Wealthy. I'm Karen Conlon. And since this is Mental Health Awareness Month, I thought it would be good to talk to you about something that so many people silently struggle with. Also, something that is deeply misunderstood. That thing being anxiety. Anxiety is something that so many people struggle with silently because many people are actually walking around secretly believing that it means that something is wrong with them. And I'm here to tell you a few things about anxiety. During today's episode, we're going to talk about some of the biological factors. We're going to talk about some of the environmental factors. And we're also going to talk about some of the things that you can learn to address your anxiety. But before we get into all of that, one of the first things that I want to say to you is that if you struggle from anxiety, it doesn't mean that you're weak. It doesn't mean that you're too sensitive. It does not mean that you're too emotional or that you're too much. It may mean that you may need some new coping skills or strategies, but it doesn't mean that you're not mentally strong enough or that you don't have discipline or not disciplined enough. So what I want to do is really challenge that narrative today. The question I have for you is, what if your anxiety is not a character flaw, if that's how you're thinking about it? And instead, what if you were to look at it as if it was a survival response, right? A survival response that became a little bit too overprotective of you. What if it's your nervous system that has learned to scan and anticipate and overthink and prepare or over-prepare? Maybe it's your nervous system staying hyper-aware because at some point in your life, whether in your younger years or maybe a little later, those strategies emotionally protected you. So today, what I want to do with this episode is to help you stop asking, what's wrong with me? And start asking, what is my mind and body trying to protect? When we understand anxiety differently, when we're able to reframe it and redefine what it means, we usually begin to respond to ourselves differently. And that changes everything. One of the biggest mistakes that people make, and especially high performance, high achieving, high functioning people, is turning anxiety into identity. So if you hear yourself saying, for example, oh, I'm just an anxious person, or they're just an anxious person. This is just, who I am. I've always been this way. I'm talking to you because I want to clarify this for you. Anxiety is not a personality trait. Anxiety is a physiological survival response. And so many people who experience anxiety are incredibly capable and responsible and aware and emotionally intelligent. But the problem is that so many of us in early childhood were rewarded in our family systems for anticipating other people's needs or staying emotionally alert, right? What does mom need? What does dad need? Ooh, the temperature in the room is getting high. What do I need to do to calm it down? Another area that contributes to this is getting rewarded in one way or another, emotionally, psychologically, through attention, through gifting, whatever, is being responsible or taking on responsibility, being prepared. And by the way, being prepared is one of those things that's tricky, because sometimes we start to confuse being prepared with becoming hyper alert and thinking about what might come wrong or what might go wrong. Monitoring moods, avoiding mistakes. We get rewarded for not making mistakes, for focusing on trying to do everything perfectly. Fast forward into adulthood, we find ourselves in analysis paralysis or struggling perfectionism. Yours truly, I've been there, done that, and still struggle with those things. We get rewarded for managing the tension in the room, right? So often what gets labeled as anxiety started early on as an adaptation to dealing with our environment, and more specifically with dealing with the demands, the environmental demands of the environment that we grew up in. Your nervous system adapts before you have the language for what's happening. This is just how it is, right? That part of the brain that focuses on survival, that is usually the first one to respond, because you don't have the language. You don't have the emotional understanding, the emotional maturity when you're so young to be able to understand, even if somebody's explaining it to you, right? You might be too young to understand. And so your nervous system takes over. And this is where understanding something called the 3 Ps can become really helpful, because anxiety rarely comes out of nowhere. The 3 Ps stand for this: P for predisposing factors, P for precipitating factors, and P for perpetuating factors. I'm going to go through examples of all of these, because understanding those can remove a tremendous amount of pressure and shame. Shame being one of those feelings that anxiety oftentimes goes hand in hand with. So let's start talking about predisposing factors. Predisposing factors are the things that may have already made your nervous system more sensitive before a current trigger ever showed up. So things like genetics, biology, maybe there is a family history of anxiety, emotional unpredictability growing up. This is a big one. If you grew up in a chaotic household, or with a parent where you didn't really know what was happening or what mood you were going to find, you don't know who you were going to meet that morning or that day when they came home from work. That's a really big one, because when you don't know what to expect, that part of the brain that focuses on survival takes over. It's the limbic part of the brain that says, we need to be prepared for danger. Genes do play somewhat of a role in one's likelihood of developing anxiety. If a close relative, for example, suffers from an anxiety disorder, a person is 2 to 6 times more likely to develop anxiety or even anxiety disorder compared to those who do not. So even though it is not the most influential factor, it is a significant factor to take note of. Other things like chronic stress exposure, instances of trauma. Now, trauma is something that I'm not going to get into too deeply in this episode, but trauma is something that can happen very obviously, and it's also something that can happen chronically and not so obviously. Almost like, imagine a little hammer chipping away at a rock. If you have instances in your life where you are having traumatic experiences, but you're not aware because maybe you're thinking, well, what's the big deal here? It's not like I'm getting neglected or I'm getting abused, but maybe you're chronically getting criticized, or you're feeling the pressure of having to do some of those things that we talked about before, right? Becoming aware of other people's moods and feeling the consequences of what happens or what you think might happen if you don't. Things like that that are not so obvious and they're more subtle. Those are things that we are often not aware of, but they are absolutely a big factor in the formation of anxiety or anxiety disorders. Pressure to perform. And by perform, I'm talking about success, only getting A's, being the best athlete, being the best at everything. Pressure to always be the best at everything that you do. And of course, your role in the family, which is not something that you can control, but it is something that once you become aware of, you can change through your behaviors and how you respond to things. Now, a lot of people listening may have grown up becoming hyper aware of emotional environments. The more that a person reacts to certain stimuli with anxiety or anxious thoughts or behaviors, the stronger the instinct of that response will be. So going back to the example of a child growing up in a chaotic household, a child that grows up in that environment, chaotic, dysfunctional, well, there is a higher likelihood that that child's brain will become wired to respond to panic and anxiety more often because that is what has become familiar and normalized for them. They are constantly aware of hypervigilance or hyper alert. And so this obviously develops into other things like perhaps trouble sleeping, trouble focusing. A lot of these symptoms later show up as ADHD-like symptoms. Regardless, if the environment that this child grew up in is in that way or functions in that manner, the likelihood of the wiring that happens in their brain to get wired in that way is much higher than a child who grew up, for example, in maybe a safer environment, maybe a positive household where they didn't have to feel anxious very often, where there were adults around who took the responsibility of making sure that they're tending to the child's emotional well-being. You don't have to be perfect, by the way. Being a good enough parent, and that is a term that's been around for a really long time. It is okay to be a good enough parent. You do not have to be perfect, but it is important for you to be conscientious of the emotional needs of your kids at the time. And sometimes it's hard for a parent because that means that we have to contend with things that make us uncomfortable and that also trigger our own anxieties. But regardless, right, if a child grew up in a different environment where that's like safe and positive and the stressors either don't happen as often, or when they do happen, you have the adults taking care of those things. Well, an anxiety response may not be the first thing that the brain turns to. And those kids in those environments have a higher likelihood of turning towards resilience and logical thinking because they're not on survival mode. That's not what their brain is right away going to or tapping into. Children adapt to environments, even unhealthy ones. And sometimes anxiety makes perfect sense when you understand what your nervous system learned early on, because your nervous system learned survival before it learned peace. I mean, this is just primal We are built this way. And once those patterns are wired in, are they changeable? Yes, absolutely. Typically, once those patterns are wired in, certain situations in adulthood can activate them almost instantly. Now, this brings me to talking to you about the amygdala, which is there's two little amygdalae in the brain, but we usually just say the amygdala. It's basically the brain's alarm system. It's your body's alarm system. It is the brain's threat detection system. And the amygdala's job is to protect you and to help you survive. That is what it's there for. It's not there to think logically. It's not there to rationalize. It's not there to say, oh, well, let's look at the situation. Let's evaluate. No, its job is to protect and survival. The problem, though, is that the brain does not always know how to distinguish well between physical danger and emotional danger, or even perceived danger. And I'll give you examples of everyday things, right? A missed email that you forgot to answer, criticism, conflict, uncertainty, or someone sounding off or just going off, being misunderstood or feeling misunderstood, rejection, right? All of these things are not physically dangerous. They're not really dangerous to you in a physical way. However, they can activate the same survival systems that were originally designed to protect you from physical threats. So, for example, when one of these things happen that I've just listed, your body may respond with racing thoughts or your chest tightens, right? You might feel a sense of urgency, right? There's these physiological responses, muscle tension. You might feel it in the back of your shoulders, hyper analysis. The other big thing that happens so often is GI issues, stomach issues. Maybe you have to run to the bathroom or you get constipated. So people develop a lot of GI issues that are anxiety related, and cortisol and adrenaline spikes. And cortisol, which is the stress hormone, is particularly difficult when it's chronically elevated, because cortisol is supposed to start up its highest when you wake up in the morning for the first about half hour. It helps you get up, right? Get up, get yourself wide awake. And then as the day goes into the evening, your cortisol levels should be going down. But if you're constantly elevated due to anxiety, those cortisol levels are possibly staying elevated, which, if cortisol level is your stress hormone, then this is a problem in many ways, right? And, so many people judge themselves for having these types of responses, but look, your nervous system is trying to prevent pain before pain happens. It just can't recognize that these are not actual physically painful things for you, or that are going to happen to you. But the truth is that this happens because your brain learned protection before it learned discernment, before it learned how to decide, oh, what should I be nervous about or fearful of? That part of the brain develops later. The next important question for you now becomes, so what specifically activates your system? That takes me to the second P, which is precipitating factors. Now, precipitating factors are the triggers that activate anxiety in the present moment. So some of the things that we deal with that might fall into the category of precipitating factors are things like relationship conflicts, parenting stress, uncertainty, work pressure, burnout, Illness is another one that people don't often relate with anxiety, but 100% can be a precipitating factor. Lack of sleep, overstimulation. Your nervous system might need more of a break from your current environment than you realize. And that, coupled with other things like criticism, having difficult conversations, is another big one. We engage in avoidance because difficult conversations also light up that part of our brain that feels like danger, but it's emotional. It's not a real danger. And other things like overwhelm and financial stress. I mean, these are all, I think, familiar to most of us here. And the truth of the matter is that triggers, they're not random. Your nervous system is responding to a perceived threat, not to logic. When something feels emotionally dangerous, even though you know that you're okay, it is very difficult to get out of that survival mode. Because when we don't understand what's happening, we often start believing the feelings, or that the feelings themselves are facts. I want you to remember what I'm about to say here. Feelings are feelings. They're not facts. Now, you might have a feeling about something that is very appropriate, but it doesn't mean that that feeling warrants for your brain's alarm system to send off 100% fire alarm bells going through your body and cause you so much anxiety. And so one of the most important shifts is learning how to stop interpreting anxiety as an identity or your identity, and start separating yourself from that so that you can interpret it as information. Because anxiety sensations are signals. They're not proof of anything necessarily. They're signals. And when you can learn the difference between the different types of anxieties that you're feeling, and also what their source is, then you are going to understand that there's information that you can use to discern whether what you are anxious about is something that deserves anxiety, or maybe it's something that, okay, I need to address this. I need to do something about this. Because anxiety sensations, again, they're signals. They're not proof. A tight chest is activation. Racing thoughts, that's activation. Hyperanalysis or overthinking, that's activation. Restlessness, that's activation as well. So the feelings are real, okay? And we're not saying don't listen to the feelings. What we're saying is it is important to learn to identify the information, and then we can retrain your brain to help it help you better so that you're not overreacting, overanalyzing, overthinking about things that aren't really dangerous and that you can probably do something about, that you may have more control over than you previously thought. Feelings are real, but they're not always accurate predictions. So instead of immediately spiraling into what's wrong with me, I'm going to recommend that you start asking, what is feeling unsafe now? And again, I want to be very clear on this. I'm not saying deny your feelings, pretend that they're not happening, let's dismiss, let's reduce. On the contrary, I'm saying you acknowledge those feelings, but instead of just staying with that, take a step back, become an observer, and say, maybe there's a question here. What is it that I'm afraid could happen? right? Is this current reality or maybe old conditioning? Am I responding in a way that I've always responded, whether this is real or not, this is real danger or not? What's actually happening here? What's the need underneath this response? What am I needing right now? What am I fearing right now? Because your anxiety may not be telling you the truth, but it's usually telling you where to look. So if you stop for a moment to ask yourself the questions, what's happening? What is this about? Under what circumstances have I felt this before? That is where you can start looking and uncovering some answers. Look, the reality is that awareness without understanding creates fear. If you're aware of something, but you don't understand, it's pretty normal to be afraid of it. Or if you have awareness and you haven't thought to stop and think about what it means and what it means for you, well, that might create uncertainty. But awareness coupled with understanding, it creates choice. And that's what I want you to take away, is that when you have awareness with understanding, all of a sudden, the options open up for you. And even after a trigger goes away, so many people stay stuck in this chronic activation. But when you have this awareness with the understanding, you can get yourself out of that activation. Now, the third P is perpetuating factors. And perpetuating factors are things that are continuously feeding anxiety long after the original trigger has passed. What does this look like? Okay, chronic stress. A big one for all of us is overcommitment, saying no, right? Constantly people pleasing, not setting boundaries for ourselves about what we're willing to accept or not accept, suppressing emotions, taking on more responsibility than you need to or should, having difficulty slowing down, just maybe never slowing down, and coupled with a lack of recovery, not giving yourself like enough time to recover from not slowing down. Another big one is staying in dysregulating environments. And what I mean by that is environments that put you in a situation where maybe there's constant chaos, or some of the things that I mentioned before, like you don't know what to expect, or maybe there's a lot of volatility, maybe there's a lot of yelling. In some family systems, you can't get away from it. It's difficult to get away from it. Maybe in some work environments as well. And that is really tough. So I just want to acknowledge that. And for you listening out there, if you are in a situation where you're saying to yourself, well, I don't have any choice. This is the family. This is what I'm in. This is my work. I hear you, and I have a lot of compassion for you. For you, it is about finding small pockets of regulating yourself, maybe being able to step out or step away from the environment, learning things, exercises, breathing exercises, things like that, that can help calm your nervous system down. And other skills like becoming an observer, which means stepping away psychologically in the moment and watching what's happening, assessing the situation. So again, those are skills that require some time and some training, but absolutely possible and doable. Other perpetuating factors that we're often not aware of, but are big: poor communication. Poor communication is such a big one because there is there is misunderstanding that comes from poor communication. When we have poor communication and misunderstandings, people tend to make assumptions. The narratives that we then come up with are incredibly anxiety provoking and inducing. So poor communication is actually a much bigger problem than you might realize. But I think one of the biggest ones is constantly overriding your own needs. This one is hard for people. I get it, because a lot of times we're raised in an environment where other people's needs come first. Maybe your environment demands that you take care of everybody else first. Sometimes culturally, right? Many of the cultures around the world, or even in our own communities, sometimes our religious communities, the expectation in many of these situations is that we need to override our needs for the greater good, for the community. And I'll tell you, even if that is your normal and that is what you grow up in, your feelings are still there. You still have feelings. And whether you cope by dismissing them or minimizing them, compartmentalizing is another one, or sometimes through toxic positivity, right? Oh, everything's fine. Everything's fine. Nope, we're good. Those are all examples of constantly overriding your own needs, and it will wear on you. You know, sometimes anxiety is not really asking you to calm down. Sometimes it's just asking you to pay attention. Because, listen, my friends, you cannot heal in conditions that constantly reinforce survival mode. Okay? A lot of people try to manage anxiety without changing their environments because, like I mentioned before, maybe you can't. I get that. They try to manage their anxiety without changing the patterns or the relationships that keep continuously activating and triggering their nervous system, their survival part of the brain. So the goal really becomes less about fighting anxiety. It's not really about it. Anxiety is our friend in many, many ways. It is here to help us, protect us in many ways. So it's not really about fighting anxiety, and it's really instead more about retraining your relationship to safety and your need to feel safe. I want to talk to you about how to recalibrate this a little bit. Because, you know, again, healing anxiety or healing from anxiety is not about becoming fearless. And instead, it's about increasing capacity, increasing your tolerance, increasing your ability to access both your emotional brain and your logical brain and have those two work together. It's about teaching the nervous system, your nervous system, I can survive discomfort. I can tolerate uncertainty. I can feel emotions without collapsing. This requires a retraining of your brain and a retraining of your nervous system. Some things cost money in order to do this, and some things don't. Things like therapy, maybe coaching is your thing. Yeah, that costs money and may not be accessible to everyone. But things like sleep regulation, like improving your sleep hygiene, movement to release the pent-up energy in your body, learning to slow down, breath work. There's so many videos online that teach you breath work. Body awareness. Body awareness is a big one. I mean, I feel like I talk about body awareness probably in every episode that I've done, because it is so important for you to learn to trust your body's signals. And when your body is trying to tell you something, your body, even if you are dealing with a chronic illness where you have maybe felt in the past, like, my body's betrayed me, I can't trust my body. Your body is not your enemy. Your body's always trying to tell you what it needs. So slow down, listen to it. Set boundaries for yourself. Just because you set boundaries for other people doesn't mean they're going to listen to them. You can't control that. But you know who you can set boundaries for, my friend? You can set boundaries for yourself. You can set boundaries for yourself around whether you say yes or whether you say no. You can set boundaries around whether you want to engage in a certain conversation or not. There's so many little things and ways that you can set boundaries for yourself, and then follow that up with an action or lack thereof, if that's what you need. And I'm going to mention one more, which might sound a little counterintuitive, but it is really important. The last thing I want to mention with this is intentional discomfort. And it's like your own little personal form of exposure therapy. Intentional discomfort is important because avoiding every uncomfortable feeling, what that does is it reinforces to the nervous system that, ooh, yeah, we definitely need to stay away from that. What I'm saying is putting yourself in a situation where you may have felt previously scared of emotionally, not because there's actual danger, and trying it out. So, for example, saying no. Maybe you have an in-law or in-laws who expect you to be at their house for dinner every Sunday. And maybe that's a family thing, and that could be very nice. But, maybe once in a while you don't want to do that. But the thought of that is terrifying. What would saying no look like? You don't even have to do it. You know what I'm inviting you to do? I'm inviting you to just think about it. All right. Just think about it. Revel in the thought of dreaming what it would be like to say no and having them be like, oh, sure. No problem. I understand. Give yourself a little bit of dream time with that. To actually do it, sure. It takes a little bit more work to kind of work yourself up and, think about what you're going to say, but just allow yourself to think about what it would be like to say no. Another type of intentional discomfort is not over-explaining, especially when we're talking about something or to someone that we feel guilty about, like we feel like we can't say no to them, or like we owe them something. Or maybe we don't owe them anything, don't owe them any explanation, but maybe the person's silence makes you feel uncomfortable. And just the silence of the room makes you feel like, oh my gosh, I have to say something. A good example of this, I was just thinking, a good example of this is, let's say you want to rest and you have somebody that's like, oh, let's go hang out or whatever, or come over for dinner, family member or friend that, you're like, I don't want to do it. Or a group of friends. Maybe there are a group of friends going on and you just want to stay home and veg. That's okay. And instead of saying, well, this and this and that, and just going into whatever over explanation you might go into, you just say, you know what? Thanks so much. I love hanging out with you. I love visiting, whatever it is. I'm feeling really tired though tonight, and I'm going to stay in, but I wish I was there, and have fun. Tell me all about it. That's it. You're not going into over explaining mode. You're not going into the whole like, oh, this and that. No, there's no need to. There's no need to over explain. Maybe it's something for the future. You can let them know, like, hey, let me get back to you on it. When you say, let me get back to you on it, it gives you space. It creates space. It helps you to think about it, which then lessens your anxiety. Other things like tolerating uncertainty, intentional discomfort by allowing yourself to tolerate uncertainty. And, maybe that is that you texted somebody and they don't respond right away, or in 5 minutes or 10 minutes. And then the old brain starts saying things like, oh man, what did I do? Maybe I made them angry. Wait, did I say something? And then now you're going through like this whole log of conversations that you had with this person, text, whatever. Would I do? Maybe that time in, 2015 that I didn't go to dinner when they asked. No, just allow yourself to tolerate uncertainty. Give the situations a chance to maybe give you some more data, maybe some more information, or just giving yourself some time. Another area where you will allow yourself to engage in intentional discomfort is allowing yourself to disappoint someone. Oh man, I know that one's hard. I know it is so hard. I don't like it. I feel awful when I disappoint people, but sometimes you have to, because you're not going to always please people. You are not perfect. I am not perfect. You are going to make mistakes, or you are going to grow in ways that people have a hard time accepting. Growth is uncomfortable. There's so much discomfort in growth. But, that's why they call it growing pains. And sometimes you have to allow yourself to disappoint someone in order to know that you can get through it and be okay, that you're going to come out on the other side of it and you're going to be okay. And one other thing that I want to mention around intentional discomfort is pausing before seeking reassurance. This is another big one, because a lot of times, especially if we feel that we are disappointing someone, we right away are looking for reassurance. We want to make sure that everything's fine, that they're okay, that we're okay. And we rush to try to find a solution. When you do that, when you don't pause, you're not allowing yourself to feel the discomfort move through you and let your nervous system know that even though I don't like this, even though this feels ick, I'm okay. I don't love that I disappointed that person. I'm disappointed in myself for doing that. But I am going to come out of it on the other side. It is going to be okay. It may warrant a conversation afterwards. It may warrant some kind of action. I don't know. But if you allow to pause before you seek reassurance, you will once again be retraining your brain and helping your nervous system know that it can survive this and that it can thrive through this. Your nervous system needs to know the difference between real danger and perceived danger. If it is constantly on high alert, it's going to be difficult for it to actually do the job that it's meant to do. And again, I want to remind you that the goal is not perfection. The goal is safety with yourself. And because, anxiety is part of being human, it's also, I think, important to normalize relapse and reactivation. Even if you have it right, even if you, let's say, I don't know, maybe you go to therapy, you've heard 100 podcasts and you have been practicing all the things. Guess what? We all relapse. Life always throws a wrench. It is absolutely possible and normal for us to relapse and feel reactivation. By relapse, that means that maybe you've gotten some tools under control, you've gotten some tools under your belt, some strategies, and you've been doing really well for a while. And then all of a sudden life throws a wrench or the circumstances change, you're not expecting whatever happens. And you find yourself in a situation where now your amygdala, your brain's alarm system is going off like it used to. That's what I mean by relapse. And maybe you're behaving or doing the same things that you used to before. And that's just a relapse. It doesn't mean failure. And by the way, relapses tend to happen very specifically during specific times. Like maybe you're transitioning from a career or relationship. Maybe there's a relationship that's ending. Maybe you're going through grief. Maybe there's been a loss. Parenting stressors. I mean, I'm going through it right now because my 16-year-old is driving on her own, doing all her things. And even though she's not the one stressing me out, I'm feeling the stress of worrying that, she's driving and she's out there, and sure, it doesn't matter that I can, use the thing to see where she's at if I need to. It doesn't matter. I worry about that. And so I've experienced some relapses recently and my own anxiety around that. And so I'm practicing some of the things that I'm talking about here, right? Other things that can cause a relapse, health issues for sure, conflict, career changes, uncertainty in general, and of course, burnout, the B word, burnout. And once again, this is not about you never being anxious or feeling anxious ever again. That's not only unrealistic, but it wouldn't be a safe thing for you because anxiety does have its place. In many cases, anxiety can be a great motivator. The goal instead is to recognize the warning signs early or earlier and respond differently. And this is why, if you can have a contingency plan in place, it's helpful and it matters. So some questions to think through, I'm going to give you now. What are my common triggers? That's one of the first questions. I'm going to give you 3 questions for you to think about. What are my common triggers? What are my early warning signs? And what are the things that help to regulate me before things escalate? These are the things to think about when you are not in an anxious state. And I encourage you to journal. I encourage you to put these things somewhere where you can refer back to them so that you can see your answers in black and white. What are my common triggers? What are my early warning signs? And what are the things that help to regulate me before things escalate? Be honest with yourself about overwhelm. I mean, what are the things that overwhelm you? I'm in midlife right now, and honestly, at this age, the things that overwhelm me now are most definitely very different things than overwhelmed me in my 30s or 40s. I mean, honestly, so get real with yourself and honest with yourself about the things that overwhelm you. One of the other things that I really like is to set aside some worry time. And I know this sounds really weird, but setting aside worry time, if you're worried about something in the moment, you literally write it down somewhere. And then you say to yourself, I'm not going to worry about this right now. I'm going to worry about it later. And you set some time to worry about it later. Like for real, like you put it in your calendar, not too close to bedtime, but maybe 5, 6, I don't know, whatever your bedtime is. And you take time to worry about those things there. This is a strategy that I've used with clients many times in the past, depending on what their needs are, their schedules, etc. But it's very effective because it honors the fact that you are anxious and worried about something. So it does honor it, and it doesn't make you feel like, you're just blowing it off. And then when you set that time and you sit down, okay, these are the things that I need to worry about. One of the things that clients have oftentimes reported is that when they sit down to look at their worry list, they have found that either many of the things have resolved themselves, or there are not actually things that need worrying because there's nothing that they can actually do anything about. Or maybe there's somebody else's problem. So worry time, as weird as that might sound, is actually a really, really great way to try to get those anxieties out of the way in the time being, if they're getting in the way of something that you're doing that you need to focus on, and then do it later. And I want to remind you that the best time to create any plan is before your nervous system is overwhelmed, because when you prepare, it does help to create emotional stability. You feel in control. You feel like you have agency. You're thinking more clearly. And when you have all of those factors, guess what? You also become more creative about solutions. When you are really anxious, it quite literally closes your creativity gap. And the resources, all the things that you could have thought about, you're just not thinking about it because all you're thinking about is, how do I get out of this? How do I stop this? Okay. So once you prepare and you have a plan and you're really thinking about things and you're starting to feel, like you have more agency, this is where everything begins to shift, y'all, because when anxiety stops becoming evidence that you're somehow broken, the power over you that it has starts to dwindle. Okay. All anxiety is it's like a dashboard indicator. It's not a broken engine. It's an indicator on your dashboard that something's off. If something on your car dashboard says, oh, there's a light here, well, you're not going to start throwing all kinds of things at it. You're going to look at it and you're going to say, oh, what is this about? And then you're going to think through and say, okay, can I do something with this? And the other thing that happens is that your shame around anxiety decreases also, because, anxiety becomes more manageable. It becomes more manageable because you stop adding a second layer of suffering through self-judgment. Emotional wealth, it's not emotional perfection. It is the ability to stay connected to yourself while you're moving through difficult internal experiences with awareness and purpose and intention. Okay. Thank you so much for being here, for showing up for yourself and listening to the Emotionally Wealthy podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it. If you're liking the podcast, please give us a review. And until next time, stay curious, stay connected, and stay emotionally wealthy. Oh, hey, quick reminder for you that this podcast is for informational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional advice, diagnoses, or treatment. Always consult a qualified professional with any questions you might have.